Okay, so welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm here for Urban Devi, and I'm so excited to welcome everyone to our Urban Devi today. We have a very special guest. Her name is Ananda Vrindavan, and she's going to be talking about the poetry of life and what does poetic mean, and what does a more poetic life look like. So a little bit about Ananda Prabhu. Ananda Vrindavaneswari Devi Dasi is the president of ISKCON of Washington, D.C. She is an educator and a writer and loves early morning hours the best. Well, that's great. And here we are in the early morning. So what a blessing. So Ananda Prabhu, please go ahead. The floor is yours. I'm just going to spotlight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, Hare Krishna to everybody. It's a great honor to be here with all of you, and I look forward to spending the next hour and a half together. I'm going to share my screen now to get us started. Okay, there we go. Right. So the poetry of living life. So just a little bit about myself first. I was born and raised in Ireland with a sizable family of 7 children. You know, really had a very stable, relatively uneventful upbringing, and eventually was drawn to leaving Ireland, heading out to America, searching, not quite sure what I was looking for, but certainly not so satisfied with life in general, with a certain amount of unfairness I found in the world and kind of arbitrary suffering. And so eventually my travels brought me to San Diego. I was a teacher at that point. And I had learned something very important, which I will share later on. I was trained as a Montessori teacher, and she has a very, which I believe holds the key to something very powerful in her educational system. But anyway, I ended up in San Diego. I got a Bhagavad Gita, which answered a lot of my questions, and eventually ended up staying in a temple and staying near the temple for the next 40 years of my life, and fully involved in different services, mainly education. I ended up 21 years in Vrindavan, involved in the Gurukula over there. And just since 2010, back here in DC, happily serving as a temple president in this really amazing community of devotees in the DMV area. So, you know, growing up, poetry interacted in my life quite a bit. I have memories of my father coming in the kitchen as I was doing my homework, and he would be reciting Shakespeare, reminding me that life is like a candle, flickering and ultimately temporary. But later on, as I took up to the practice of Krishna Bhakti, I actually saw that Bhakti is really a part of, poetry is really a part of a Bhakti practice. And in this verse from the Bhagavatam, it mentions that by the practice of Bhakti, we naturally develop qualities, good qualities, godly qualities. And these qualities include kindness, being peaceful, truthful, equable, faultless, magnanimous, mild, clean, non-possessive, a well-wisher to all, satisfied, surrendered to Krishna, without hankering, simple, fixed, self-controlled, a balanced eater, sane, love that one, mannerly, prideless, brave, sympathetic, friendly, poetic, expert, and silent. So the practice itself will draw these out of us if we do the practice well. But it's also very important to recognize and intentionally live into these qualities. And so many of them and all of them deserve a class of their own. But today I'm going to focus in on this idea of being poetic. What does that mean to us who are interested in this spiritual practice of bhakti? And how does poetic interact with our life, and how can we draw that quality out of ourselves and share it with others? So to start with, poetry and the poetic mindset is in the DNA of the bhakti path. The Sanskrit language, the mantras, the music, the dance, the verses, the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, the song of God. We really are soaked in and surrounded by a poetic beauty, both in the process and to bring us to the goal of the process, which is loving Radha and Krishna, loving the loving couple of Radha and Krishna, and being engaged in their service. So the Gita says of poems, I am the Gayatri Mantra. Some of us on this call chant the Gayatri Mantra. It's a super powerful mantra when chanted properly. But this mantra is actually the sound of Krishna's flute and is brought to us first received by Lord Brahma. So the Gayatri is a poem. The Maha Mantra is its own poem. It's balanced, it's rhythmic, it's complete as a poetic statement. Mahaprabhu here in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Chaitanya Charitamrita itself is literally one big, long, beautiful string of poetic verses. But here he says that Mahaprabhu praised, he loved the metaphors and other literary ornaments of Srila Rupa Goswami's transcendental poetry. Without such poetic attributes, he said, there is no possibility of preaching transcendental mellows. Without poetic attributes, Mahaprabhu said, there's no possibility of teaching them. There's no possibility of grasping them. This taste of rasa, this transcendental mellow, it's poetry and poetic language that can open the door to that, that can give us a taste of that, and that can help us deepen that taste. And Prabhupada himself and many of our acharyas are poets. Prabhupada wrote many poems. He, of course, he moved poetically. He spoke poetically. He did all those beautiful, he had a poetic way about him. Anybody who was in his presence will tell you that. And this was just a few lines from the poem that he wrote when he was just pulling into America, 1965, 66, and was feeling anxious about the task ahead of him. And he wrote, "Oh Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance. Make me dance, oh Lord, make me dance as you like." Who's not touched with this expression that Prabhupada has offered us in this poem that he wrote, while still, I think, just viewing the harbor from his cargo ship And another excerpt from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna is forever described in poetic ways. The bodily beauty of Sri Krishna is like a wave in the ocean of eternal youth. In that great ocean, there is the whirlpool of the awakening of ecstatic love. The vibration of Krishna's flute is like a whirlwind, and the flickering minds of the gopis are like straws and dry leaves. After they fall down in the whirlwind, they never rise again, but remain eternally at the lotus feet of Krishna. So that's just a little inclination of the type of poetry that we are constantly surrounded by while we're connected to reading and practice and hearing and chanting Krishna Bhakti. So we look at the question, what's the impact of poetry and the poetic mindset on our lives? Not just from our daily practice, but from other poems or other life experiences that we will have. So one time I wrote a poem about a beautiful devotee called Krishna Nandini. And I wrote the poem about her, describing her as a poem. Krishna Nandini Devi is like a poem because she does what a good poem does. She stops us in our tracks, makes us pause and think and see things differently. Like a poem, she touches our emotions, draws the feeling out of us. In her presence, you feel like you're held in a warm embrace and simultaneously swept away by the strength of her convictions. She is a short and crisp haiku. Don't say, I do me, say, I do Krishna. And she is a couplet at the end of a sonnet that forgives and extracts the best out of all situations. She is the pilgrim's progress, but not an allegory. She's the living truth, the real deal of what we know, love, and cherish about the practice of Krishna Bhakti. She is the North Star poem, leading the way into that bright and beautiful night, full of stars, connected and connecting others to the full moon of Krishna. So those of you who knew Krishna Nandini, powerful, a beautiful, powerful disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who this poem doesn't even begin to express who she was and how she touched so many devotees' lives. But I use it to give you a sense of what a poem does and can do for us, which is really meant to slow us down, sometimes even stop us in our tracks, to help us pause and see things differently. Because the practice of spiritual life is the practice of reframing, is a practice of moving away from seeing things from the ordinary and moving towards seeing things from Krishna's point of view, from the spiritual point of view, from the soul view. Poems definitely should draw out our emotions, and for Krishna Bhakti, we need to feel emotions. And they will often extract really the essence of a philosophy, of a teaching, of an experience. And of course, for us, aspiring devotees of Krishna, a poem, I mean, the real poetry is just, a poem will help us see Krishna's hand everywhere, feel Krishna in our life, and feel held and loved and supported by Krishna. So I'll just go through a few of those things. So a poem stops us in our tracks. So if you have read any of the work of Mary Oliver, and different poems will strike people in different ways. So I'm sharing ones that have touched me. She's a beautiful poet. Mary Oliver one time said that that the beauty of the world had saved her. But in one of her poems about summer, the last line is, "Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" So of course we have more than one wild and precious life, but we are one individual wild and precious life as an individual living being. So there's so many ways. What's really nice about poetry is that it allows us the creative freedom to really read it and allow it to speak to us. So sometimes you ask yourself, well, what is the poem asking of me? So this one, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Just the realization that, yes, I do have one wild and precious life. And really, am I doing it? Stopping us in our tracks is also helping us change direction, helping us rethink, helping us, slow down a bit to refocus our energy. Poems can help us see differently and see the unseen. We get caught up in life. It's easy to do that. So this is one of the quotes that my father would give me when he would walk in the kitchen, where I would be at our kitchen table in a small town in Ireland doing my homework. And, I'm actually looking back now grateful that he, sprinkled my life with a desire ultimately a desire for philosophy, for a truth that could respond to such statements that Shakespeare made in Macbeth. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets this hour upon the stage and is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Wow, so much power in those words. So a poem will help us step back and look at life differently, almost like call it out, challenge it. And in that way, we separate ourself from our body, ourself from our false ego. We begin to discern the true ego. Poetry and poems should touch our emotions. Again, one of the goals, of course, of Krishna Bhakti is that our emotions, that we're very alive. The philosophy moves from the head to the heart, and we're very alive and have a very real and beautiful emotional relationship with Krishna and Krishna's devotees and life and everything that we're connected to. And Prabhupada, now this excerpt of a poem by Prabhupada is actually 26, he wrote 26 verses of a free-flowing poem in 1958. Where have my loving father and mother gone to now? And where are all my elders who were my own folk? Who will give me the news of them? Tell me, who? All that is left of this family is a list of names. We need to allow poetry to allow us to feel. And the gift of poetry is that it does allow us to feel, to be moved by the poet's, this case Prabhupada's, reflection and his feeling of disconnect in the world as he begins his commitment to sannyas and commitment to teaching Krishna consciousness. Poems allow us to zoom out beyond the body. Another famous poet from our tradition, Govinda Das Kaviraj, and the famous line, Kamala Talajala, this life totters like a drop of water on a lotus petal. Therefore, you should always worship the lotus feet of Hari. imagery, this image of life tottering like a drop of water on a lotus petal. Just that zoom out alone can allow us to let go of all the little things that might be bothering us, all the things that we wish we could do and haven't yet done, all the irritations in our life, all the difficulties. A good poem will allow you to breathe beyond the body, breathe beyond the moment into a greater sense of who we are and what we are doing in the grand scheme of things. And most important, poetry really invites personification. And for a devotee of Krishna, this is really important because we tend to slide into Mayavad, just habits, conditioning very, very easily, right? And personification tends to be sometimes seen as a little, mythology or, fairy story, but the whole spiritual world, everything is a person. Everything's alive. The milk is jumping out of the pot, wanting Mother Yashoda's attention. Personification, and when that happens in poetry, it can also remind us that, yes, actually, on this spiritual platform, everything is a beating heart. And of course, Rumi never fails to deliver. And still, after all this time, the sun has never said to the earth, "You owe me." Look at what happens with a love like that. It lights up the sky. So a good poem, or a poem that will speak to you, will slow you down, will help you see differently, will have us feel emotions, will allow us to zoom out very quickly and get things into perspective, and will invite us into being very comfortable with this idea of personhood, which ultimately we need to be very comfortable with the personhood of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and all the residents of Goloka Vrindavan. So we've taken a look at being part of a very poetic practice of Krishna Bhakti. We've taken a look at what a good poem will do to us, how it will move us, and it will draw our attention to, how it will speak to us. And then if we're looking at this idea of being poetic, right, as a quality that's developing in us as humans who want to ultimately discover, uncover, reveal our true self. So what helps us bring out and live into this quality of being poetic? And of course, as I mentioned earlier, just the daily practice of hearing and chanting, especially the practice of hearing Krishna's holy name, that powerful holy name, and japa and kirtan, the Bhagavatam, the association of devotees, all of those intentional practices that we do will soften us and allow us to create poetic environments of beauty, and interact with people in better ways. Now, nature is a huge powerful way that speaks to us. Nature sometimes softly whispers to us. It sometimes loudly calls out poetry and visual metaphors of connection and of reminding us of Krishna. Gratitude, just the idea of gratitude being a poetic practice, because when you are grateful, you see you exchange, you reciprocate, you're alive, you're aware, you're seeing that you are so dependent on everything that's around you. So gratitude is a way that we can slow down, right? Slow down and feel deeply connected to Krishna. And then this idea of grace, right? When we feel Krishna's reciprocation, when we have those moments of serendipity, when we have those moments of realization, they feel like drops of grace. They feel like just these sweet moments kind of orchestrated in the subtle energies of our life, the spiritual energies of our life. And all of these things help us to see and be and create this inner joy, this inner sense of self. And ultimately, the poetic expression we're looking for is to see Krishna's hand behind everything. We see Krishna in nature, we see Krishna in gratitude, and we see and hear and feel Krishna in grace. Now, the last 3 points in this slide, beauty, inspired choice, and absorption. And this brings me back to one of my original influencers in life, which was the educator Maria Montessori. And she, in her observations of children, she saw 3 things. She said, when they are in an environment of beauty, if you create environments of beauty, first of all, that speaks to the soul. Secondly, when you have inspired choice, that you're drawn to working with a certain activity, which she had in her classrooms. And thirdly, she allowed the children to get absorbed, right? There was no time limits. If somebody wanted to work at something, she allowed them to get absorbed. And she felt that these 3 things drew out the spirit of the child, drew the child into a really deep and grounded sense of self. So we can take these 3 principles of creating environments of beauty, inspired choice, which is really one of the values of one of the teachings of the Gita, that devotional service to Krishna is individual, spontaneous, and voluntary. It's an inspired choice. I'm going to do this for Krishna. And if we have those 2 things, then the draw to be absorbed, we'll have a better chance of being absorbed. And being absorbed in serving Krishna, being absorbed with our mind as soaked in and focused on what we're doing, is how we can experience those moments of poetic beauty where we're aware, we're in the present, we're moved, we're held. We're all those things that a good poem can do. So we're creating that for our own benefit, because if we are inspired and absorbed and create environments of beauty around ourselves, then we can offer that to others. So the question I wanted to send you off, we're early here today, and we can pause here for a moment, because the question I wanted to ask of all of you, and we'll probably do this in small groups, to see where you slow down, see differently, feel some emotion, where you experience poetic moments or poetry in your life, and how that might show up for you. But we can stop here and maybe take a few questions before breaking into small groups. What do you think?
Whatever you prefer, Ananda Prabhu. I mean, we we do have a good chunk of time since you left us. So if you want to do the Q&A now, and then we'll go into breakout groups, we could do that. So we could do like 10 minutes of Q&A to kind of churn the pot before we send them into the groups. So Vaishnavis, please feel free to either raise your virtual hand or mute yourself if you have any questions or any realizations from what Ananda Prabhu has shared so far. We have a great comment from Madhu Devi in the chat. I don't know if they would like to read it, or if not, I'd be happy to read it for them. They said, so nice to hear these quotes from Maria Montessori about the child experiencing beauty. As an educator, this is so spiritually refreshing to tie in with Krishna consciousness.
Good, good, good. Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to get some questions, because there's so much more to, there's so much. I'm just touching the surface on a lot of these things.
Looks like our dear Rukmini Prabhu has something she would like to share.
I'm just reminded by hearing all of these beautiful thoughts from you, I'm reminded of this one phrase from Srimad Bhagavatam that, you know, do you think you're alive just by breathing? Like, are you, you know, the bellows in the blacksmith shop is also taking in air and breathing in and breathing out. So do you think you're alive just by, you know, just by that mechanical breathing? So, you know, it's almost, hearing from you, to me, it's such an invitation to come alive, to slow down, to, you know, to zoom out, and to, you know, to not be so mechanical in everything I'm zooming around doing. Now this, now this, now this, you know. So it's a beautiful wake-up call to me. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you. As I was preparing for this, you know, when you work with a topic, then you're very alert and aware. And so as I'm preparing for this, I live with a small child. He's just crawling, and he's discovered, it's not my child, I'm just living with a couple for a while. And so he's discovered that I live downstairs. And so as I was prepping for this class, and it was about a half an hour before I was going on the Zoom, I could hear him crawling towards the door at the top of the stairs. And then I could hear his little, you know, hand like tapping on the door, you know, banging on the door from his lying on his belly. And I just thought, that's poetry. That's a moment. That's a, you know, there's just, our life is so rich, and especially because we've been led into this sense of we're something much more than the body. And yet within the body, we can have these moments where we feel just the sweetness of being alive. I had thought to call this class the poetry of being alive. Just the power of just being alive, and being alive forever. What do you do with that?
So we actually have a question from Madhu Devi. So Madhu, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, and then we'll take a question from Alexandra.
Hare Krishna. I enjoyed listening to what you had to say. I do read a lot for research for my children's books, and I find that I have to go back to the original Sanskrit translations a lot. And I do love the English translations, but sometimes I feel like I'm missing something. As much as I have like a whole team of people helping me, and like just on the last few verses that I was looking at for when Yashoda sees in Krishna's mouth, it didn't pop out at me until I read the Sanskrit, but I had to read it so many times in order to get it. And then I've read like 5 other people's translations and versions of it. So, but every time I do feel like I find something new and fresh. And when I read the Acharyas, I try and go back to their works, because it is so poetic, like you're saying, and sometimes it's really like mind-blowing how beautiful their writing is. But that's just what I'm mostly getting from the English translation. So I guess my question is, like, what can we do as like I'll speak for myself, like a non-Sanskrit scholar, and only like knowing minimal Hindi. Like even when I listen to lectures in Hindi, it's so poetically different than what I'm getting in English. So how can we still strive like in our bhajan and like getting that bliss and being able to meditate on Krishna or whatever aspects of bhakti we are meditating on, and still be getting it from source, getting the true meanings, getting help, of course, taking shelter in sadhu sangha. But I just I think for people who are born into the language, they have like a bit of an upper game on their spiritual life, but I don't think that takes away from what we're able to still get. But yeah, anything you have to share or offer, because there's so much to say, but I want to feel like I'm getting the benefit too, and I can still like blissfully enjoy all these poetic works. So
Well, thank you. That was so beautiful. Yeah, and even to add to that, I don't know who said it, but that people will be lining up to learn Bengali to actually be able to get what the Chaitanya Charitamrita has hidden. Yeah, English is really, there are so many more languages that have so much more than English. I'm reading this beautiful book, Rukmini, and some of you know this book, Braiding Sweet Rice. And she's talking about just the language.
Grass, braiding sweetgrass.
Sweetgrass, yeah, sorry. She's talking
You're
about.
thinking of the Sunday feast coming up. And
yes, I know. Yeah, anyway. But the point is, she's just describing the language of her native American Indian tribe. And that language is just so much more, it's just layered and layered and layered with meaning and nuance and inference, and a lot of their language really, it doesn't have, she was describing how English really is, humans and everything else is a thing, an object for our enjoyment, whereas the languages, other languages are her language, and I would imagine Sanskrit and Bengali, a lot of those are much more, they're just wider and deeper. So I think we do miss out a lot. I think a lot of people study Sanskrit for that reason, to try to get a little bit of a sense of the offerings that can come from that language. At the same time, and as Prabhupada has shown us, that one Sanskrit verse can be translated in multiple ways, and unless you really are part of a particular line of teaching, that Sanskrit verse can lead you off to nowhere. And so we don't want to, as devotees, get too stuck just on the poetics of it all. Really, the ultimate is our heart being drawn to Krishna. So whatever language can help us do that, that's where we want to go. And that's where we also want to know, where am I inspired? Where do I want to dig deep? Where do I want to find connections to what I'm trying to do to help me get there? For some poems that speak to me won't speak to some of you. Others are much more drawn to art and music and so many things. I just happen to be in the land of poetry and trying to dig a little bit deeper there. But the goal for all of us, and the ultimate poem or the ultimate connection, is with that great poet in the sky, the source of it all. And that's where we want language to bring us. And because poems also can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes, and be short and long, be very crisp and be very complicated. But we want to just keep it on track for that.
Thank you so much, Ananda Prabhu, for answering Madhu Devi's beautiful question. And next we have Alexandra.
Good morning. Thank you, Ananda Prabhu, for your beautiful, beautiful class this morning. It's really touching my heart. I wanted to talk a little bit to you about words and how sometimes, like in the temple or something, I'll hear, I'll be reading, reading a translation or something, and I don't really understand the translation that well, but if I hear it sung, if I hear a melody with it, then all of a sudden something opens up inside that is just undescribable. And at one point I even said to myself, I'm actually breathing. I mean, you've used that term a lot, But so I wanted to just say that sometimes, even when it doesn't seem like I understand exactly what the word is, all of a sudden a melody will come. Some people be singing it or or even humming, and it hits my heart. And I feel like even without knowing, I feel like I understand it at that point. Even do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we've all had those kind of Krishna magic experiences, or mystic. It's a very mystic path. It's a path of grace. So when those moments happen, those, I could say, are poetic moments where something shifts and you feel it and you're moved by it. And something that didn't make sense begins to make sense. So yeah, that's wonderful when it's happened. It's always a joy. In the spiritual world, it's described, every word is a song, every step is a dance. Life, we can get very caught up. It can weigh us down. We're muddy. At least I'll speak for myself. Our heads are dense, and when we get those moments where we have the curtain drawn back a little bit, and we are touched by our efforts to connect with Krishna, our efforts to lean in, our efforts to feel something, right? The longing of the soul is to belong. This morning I was thinking of how I'm so tired living in the lands of I and mine, and I want to disappear into the lands of loving Krishna. So it's a battle, we're in a process. And so when Krishna, at those moments, we feel that he's just tapped us on the shoulder and given us something sweet, and that keeps us going. And we keep going because we have these points along the way. And that's why it's so important to take the time to slow down enough that we can be present with the mantra, that we can be present with the verse, that we can be brave enough to sing it, or to write it, or to draw it, or to paint it. I think creativity in the creative arts, and it's something Prabhupada really valued at the early days. I think there's something really to be said to encourage everybody, and especially our children, to be able to interact with the arts as part of their spiritual practice, whether it's theater, dance, or music, or poetry, or just prose, or literature in general. Because, yeah, we're all little creators ultimately, right? But what it does, it just gives us this freedom. There's, as Rumi says, out beyond, the ideas of right and wrong, there's a field. Let me meet you there. So creativity gives us the kind of poetic license to play around with things and to interact with our philosophy and our practice, or with Krishna, that can really nourish us spiritually. Because if we're not feeling nourished, if we're not getting that taste, like Prabhupada said in that earlier quote, of this rasa, right? This taste, this emotion, and how metaphor and beautiful words, no matter what language, can really help us get a sense of Krishna and a sense of who we are in reality beyond the restrictions of our current body and mind. So I think the arts are really important. And I think they're, from the get-go, they were a big part of Prabhupada's effort to bring Krishna into the world. And I think they need to remain a big part of our effort. So write, sing, dance, for yourself, for others. It really is, makes a difference,
Thank you, Ananda Prabhu. It's so inspiring. So I think we have time to take the questions or realizations from Vasanti Dasi and Sadhana Prabhu's, and then we'll be right at the time to do breakout groups. So Vasanti Dasi, if you want to unmute yourself and share.
Hare Krishna, Ananda Mataji, Prabhu, and all the assembled Vaishnavis. Thank you for this wonderful Sangha. I appreciated the slide that you shared about what brings out the poetic in you as an aspiration for myself, because if I'm honest with myself, the way I always connected with poetry is more in a somber way or more as a healing technique for when things are very difficult. And I've consciously wanted to change that in terms of, so generally it would be, oh, this material world has hurt me, let me try and find some beauty in the lesson and use this to connect to Krishna, and also to see how Krishna is the only one, and whatever the case is. So that's generally the mood of poetry for myself, like right now. But I've wanted to transition from that to a more balanced place of also the happy moments, or also that slide that you shared about beauty. What was the second one? Inspired choice
and
and
absorption.
Absorption, yes.
Yeah.
So that's just the kind of conundrum I found myself in, and I wonder what your thoughts would be on that, Ananda Vrindavan Prabhu.
It's a lovely conundrum, because I love how you say poetry is healing, because it can help us sort things out. It can definitely help us heal. It can help us bring the emotions out into, kind of hang them on the clothesline and let them billow in the wind. And then we're able to, again, feel, get through whatever difficulty is there. We can't, the goal isn't always to be, kind of, always to be happy, and not to kind of have a sense of, I'm going to be miserable for a while, and let me just work through this, or be with this. So I think it's a bit of both. I always come back to balance in terms of life in general, that you've found a lot from poetry so far. Now you can just start looking at things in different ways, or seeing ways where you can maybe more consciously use it, and use words to, or use the context of your life to create those areas of beauty, even physical environments. For Montessori, it was the environment and beautiful things in the environment that speaks to the soul. And then just, again, what we're drawn to, which is really what we'll be best at, and then can be our best offering, and that will just naturally lead to absorption. I was saying at a class recently how, and a devotee told me this, Giri Govardhan, one of our favorite devotees here in DC, that the soul is shy, and it kind of needs to be coaxed out. So somebody at that class asked me, well, tell me more about this idea of the soul being shy. And I didn't have such a great answer at the time, but later I was thinking how actually the modes of nature and the false ego are really bullies, in our lives. They really push us around a lot. And what do we do in general if we're around a bully? If we'll pull back, or most of us will experience some kind of shyness even in regular life. So to create places in your life which are places of beauty, places where you can get absorbed, where you can have that inspiration, for your service, for your offering, for your relationship with Krishna. It's such a personal journey, this Krishna Bhakti. We have to do it ourselves, but we can't do it alone. And so if we are, another of my poems that influenced me when I was growing up, because we had to memorize poems in school. One was Ode to a Grecian Urn. And at the end of that poem, it says, beauty is truth and truth beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. And so this idea of beauty and truth is beauty. Beauty is truth and truth is beauty. And I've always kind of brought that with me. And when I came to Krishna consciousness, it was like, yes, the absolute truth is beautiful, the most beautiful. And it's, and truth itself is the most beautiful thing. And so letting poetry in opening different windows and different doors in our life, it's just becoming more aware of it also. You're aware already, Vasanti, of the ways that you have worked with poetry thus far. And now you can just, write some different types of verses or poems or take shelter of that in different ways.
Thank you so much. And Salana Prabhu?
Yes, Hare Krishna, please accept my obeisances, Ananda, Vrindavan,
Hi, Sadhana.
Prabhu,
Haribol.
Haribol. Oh, such a beautiful lecture. I have a question, but I want to preamble just slightly. I think that the poetry has always been something that's inspired me from very beginning to look deeper. And I'm just so appreciative that you brought the connection between the verse and the word poetic in that verse for me, because I've always wondered what was going on. So it's very nice to have sort of this nice realization. Then what came to mind for me was, I knew that I had been inspired by a lot of Shakespeare and Lord Byron, and there was classic British education. We kind of did absorb ourselves in a lot of the literature. And then I was raising 3 children, and I was thinking, well, how can I put something in front of them which is not all just process and facts? And I spent a lot of time buying little cards to put on their desk, a little poem, quote by Gandhi, or I have a painting that's got Mother Teresa with some words on it that I kept in the house, So I was always trying this. And then when we'd be away, I would say things like, they know this, they know this from me. I would just, we wouldn't actually be near roses, but I would say, stop and smell the roses now. Let's all just stop and smell the roses quietly for a while. And they were all like, and everybody did it as a family. So I was wondering, because that was just my made up model, because I knew something was there, right? But I was wondering, since you got this Montessori background, what have you observed from the children that have been taught through this model? Do they find that pause and they find that reflection and find beauty in everything? Or is that something that has worked powerfully, do you think, as a Montessori model?
That's a great question. I haven't thought much about that. I've thought much about the process, and I've seen many terrible Montessori teachers in Montessori classrooms, and I've seen many great teachers who aren't Montessori, but who have that same sense of trying to really draw out the best of the child, or really trying to have the child have a really, education is really about, and we would say bhakti and this whole idea of varnashram, or what is mine to do for Krishna, is connected with the sense of how do I give the child a good sense of self, no matter what they're doing. But certainly what we are exposed to as children definitely influence us when we grow up. We all have experience of that, both good and bad. And so when you can expose your children to environments that are unhurried, like her Montessori was, if a child is drawn, say, and this is for young children, although she did develop a system all the way up through high school, but for a young child, if they're drawn to doing the same activity every day, this idea of repetition, she would say, don't stop that, because there's so much learning going on. And one of the most important learnings that are going on is the ability to concentrate, the ability to be present to this activity, because they're focused on it, because they want to be there. And so I would imagine that those who were in a good environment that allowed to do that, that really honored some of those good teaching principles, that families that honor those kind of things, that you would have children who were more sensitive, adults who were grown, who had more sensitivity around beauty and care and individuality, and had a greater ability to confidently make choices in their life and follow their heart, or, use their head to follow their heart. What we put in and around kids growing up is definitely, sets them up. And Waldorf, which is another very wonderful education system, although I wasn't trained in it, but I interacted with it a fair bit. And they say if a child is around a self-assured and guiding adult, that they will grow up to be really self-assured and self-guiding, because there's an environment of trust, and there's an environment of I trust you're going to figure it out. I'm here to help you if you need any help. Even in the Montessori classroom, she was a facilitator. She wouldn't call herself a teacher. She was facilitating and trusting the inherent nature of the soul to want to grow, to want to learn, to want to be its best self. Anyway, we're diverting a little bit, and I'm sensing
I think it's been great churning it, Ananda Prabhu. No, I think it's awesome. But yeah, you're right. It is time for us to go into breakout rooms. So if you would like to share the question and what activity you would like the Vaishnavis to kind of dive into, and then I will assign everyone into breakout rooms.
Okay, well, the first question, and I think is kind of what's been coming out here in this discussion, so have it amongst a smaller group, is, how has poetry interacted, or how does the poetic or poetry itself show up in your life? What are perhaps places you go to that you really feel are your favorite places, or what are some moments, poetic moments in your life? So just to share a little bit about that, how has poetry interacted with your life so far?
Great. And I'll also make sure to send that question to all the rooms in case anybody forgets. And since we did do Q&A before breakout rooms, we do have a little bit more time, so we can do perhaps 15 minutes, because they will be groups of up to 3 participants in the room, so everyone will have time to share. So please keep an eye out for a little pop-up that will come up in prompting you to join a room where you can share all these little nectar drops with your fellow Vaishnavis. So let me just pause the recording first, and we'll have time for like 1 or 2 shares of, if somebody wants to share any realizations from their group, if you created some poetry or whatever you would like to share. We have time for 1 or 2 before we have our dear Rukmini Prabhu do some closing announcements. So this, if you can just raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself, whatever you prefer. We have Stephanie. Thank you for volunteering. Go ahead.
Haribol, good morning. It's very nice to be here. This is the first opportunity I've had to join in. So thank you all very much for making it a very nice time for me. In our little group, one of the things that we were talking about is how the scriptures are so poetic within our lives, and where we can just find those ways of coming home. And one of those ways where I found coming home is just by simply listening to the shlokas. I don't have to understand them, but just listening to them and listening for the beauty that's within those has been truly remarkable and amazing. And that's something that we all found of benefit. So.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And also welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always great when we have new people joining our Urban Devi Sangha. And yes, the power of listening. It's so powerful. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Does anybody else?
I just want to add, Stephanie forgot the phrase that she used in the group, because she started on script, was 8 years ago that you came across the scriptures, and you said that as you go through them, the flow, there's a sense of coming home, which was she missed out on saying that, but that was what struck me, as that, you know, the feeling and emotion that she has from this, and it was very beautiful. So sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you, Salana Prabhu, for the assist. And that's why we need these Vaishnavi Sanghas, right? To remind each other. Ananda Prabhu?
Just saying, no, that's beautiful. That sense of coming home, the sense of that warm embrace, just by listening to the poetic verses, because they really are. And sometimes Sanskrit is very carefully put together. That's a whole other topic and exploration. But the verses are you know, spiritually, scientifically put together to draw that out of us as well. So it's lovely you have that ability to sit with it and feel that.
Rukmini Prabhu, did you have something you wanted to share from your group?
Yeah, you know, well, first of all, Ananda, what you were just reminding me just now of, and I'm trying to think of the whole line, but Rupa Goswami says something like, what is the use of poetry if it doesn't cause the heart to spin? And what's the rest of it? If it doesn't cause the heart to spin, what's the use of it? And in our group, we had a lovely group. And I guess I mentioned first that I was so struck by, you know, well, you know, taking the time out, right? Like, how did you put it, Ananda? Just stopping us in our tracks. And I was so struck by, you know, here you are preparing for this presentation, and you've invited this family with a small baby to live in your house, and he's knocking on the door. You're in the basement, they're upstairs. You didn't stick them in the basement. And here this crawling baby is like knocking on the door of the basement. And instead of getting annoyed that, hey, I only have a few minutes to present and blah, 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 as I might have done, you're thinking, this is a poem. This crawling baby is a poem. And so I was so struck by that. And then Yuri, we had two beautiful women in our group. We had Bhagya and Giri Govardhan, a lady whose name is Giri Govardhan. Anyway, so Giri was saying that just that idea that, you know, the other alternative name for this presentation that you had, that life itself is a poem, and that being alive to see it, you know, that crawling baby, that takes being alive, was the point that she was making, being alive to see that. And Bhagya was making a beautiful point also, that poetry is, and I love this, Bhagya, thank you so much, that poetry is something coming from you. So poetry is like our gift to each other in community. And so we're so grateful for this Sangha. Both of them said that this was their first time joining the Urban Devi Sangha. So thank you both.
Yeah, it is.
But that's so beautiful. Just poetry is a gift of yourself to others, to the world. So yeah, I found that to be very moving. What else? What else?
Yes, does anybody else have something that they would like to share? We still have time for one or two brief shares before Rukmini Prabhu does her announcements. And you can, again, either raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself. And while people are getting themselves ready to do that, I also just want to remind everyone, especially since we have so many beautiful first-timers here, and I'm putting it into the chat, we do have some special WhatsApp groups available. If you're really enjoying this Vaishnavi Sangha, you can continue it on WhatsApp. We have an announcements only WhatsApp group where you can join, and only announcements will be there. And then we have a more active discussion one, which is centered around Urban Devi topics, you know, announcements of when Rukmini Prabhu and other speakers are going to be having class, and you can join that. And then also, if you want to partner with Rukmini Prabhu, there's her Patreon as well that I've included. So please feel free to announce that. And then we also have our website, urbandevi.com, where you can sign up for a newsletter, as well as we have a Facebook and an Instagram. So we're trying to branch out, and Rukmini Prabhu is out on social media, ready to connect all the Vaishnavis together. So does anybody else have? Oh, I see Sri Radha Devi Dasi. Sorry, I just saw you pop up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really nice being in your class. Ananda Vrindavana.
Radha.
Yeah, I got to partner with Vasanti, and I had a really wonderful time getting to reflect, and for her to hear me and reflect and give me some just like really good like ideas. And I was telling her that for the first time I've really slowed down because I started homeschooling 2 little devotee girls in our community. And they really helped me to just slow down and reflect and be really aware of what I'm saying. They're so in tune that it's helped me to be more in tune. I was telling Vasanti that like my background is computer science, so being in that kind of field, I was just so glued to my computer and instead of people for some time, and so then more coming into homeschooling and not being around a computer, we don't look at devices when I'm with them. We're like just completely focused, and in the outside world a lot, that I have been able to be way more present in my life. And so yeah, I get to do this for my friends' kids. They trusted me somehow, even though I don't have a educational background like for young kids. One of my friends told me, because I have life coaching training, she said for her, being a kindergarten teacher is like being a life coach for little kids. So she said, you can do it because you have the training. So yeah, I'm just very grateful that their parents let me homeschool them, and that's been my experience of being able to be present more is little kids helping me with that.
Wonderful.
That's so sweet. Thank you so much, Sri Radha Devi Dasi. So it is time for our dear Rukmini Prabhu to close us out. Before she does that, I also just wanted to take a moment to thank Ananda Prabhu and all the Vaishnavis for sharing. Even though I wasn't able to be at the breakout groups, I felt like I got so much nectar just from the presentation and from the Q&A. So I'm just so grateful to everyone for that. And please, Rukmini Prabhu, close us out.
Thank you, Ananda Vrindavan. Thank you so much. So many, many treasures. I was just scribbling so many notes, and thank you for your example of life as poetry. And I think, you really serve to open our eyes to slow down, take a break and zoom out. So I'm really grateful. And I was so grateful to you, Sri Radha, for what you just said about, seeing through the eyes of children. I think, didn't Jesus Christ say that, and the child shall lead them, right? So I was reminded, Sri Radha, when you said that yesterday, we were at the Rath Yatra in Philadelphia, and there was one little boy, I think he was about 5, and my husband, Anuttama, introduced me to him, and he said, Rukmini was initiated by Prabhupada when she was 16 in 1968. And this little boy paused and he said, but didn't they have schools way back then? And so, yeah, we can gain so much wisdom and so much zooming out from hearing from innocent people like little children and pure devotees. So thank you all so much for being here, for lending your pure hearts and wisdom. And our next session, if you'd like to mark your calendars, please join us on October 16th, when Guru Charana Padma from the UK will be speaking about diving deeper in devotional literature, practical strategies and realizations. So she's a wonderful, wonderful, deep devotee who's been a practitioner for many, many years. And she happens to be the mother of Janavi Harrison and Tulsi. So 2 wonderful kirtan years. So please join us on October 16th. Thank you all so much for being here. It's a great joy to be able to have your association in our lives. And so again, thank you so much, Ananda Vrindavan, for teaching us how to slow down and appreciate Krishna's grace and nature and beauty and all of these lessons. So grateful to you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rukmini Prabhu. And just a quick reminder, please make sure to join our WhatsApp chat groups. A lot of you are sharing so much sweet nectar in the chat for the Zoom, and it will disappear once the Zoom closes. So please join the WhatsApp group, and you can share these sweet kind of like nectar drops in there so that we can all see them and Zoom will not eat them up. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you to the next Hare Krishna, Haribo.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.